trauma is a pretty extensive word in terms of the scope of what it references. It's not necessarily a singular event. We go into freeze and shut down and dissociation. And what happens is when that's happening over and over and over again, it's like the body's ability to change gears and move through those different states gets stuck.
Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Conversations with me, Brett Moran, and the Coconuts. And of course, I've got another special guest. Her name is Gemini Adams, and she is a trauma recovery specialist. I know that was a bit of a tongue tie for me, but basically, Gemini's amazing. She's got such a beautiful energy. I can't wait to bring her on the podcast and help any of you guys to understand any of your traumas, maybe from your childhood. So basically, you can be free, or you can heal, or awaken to your essence that's deeper inside, beyond all of this bullshit that's in the head. So, Gemini, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. Hi, nice to be here.
Did I get that right? It's a trauma
recovery specialist.
What is that? Let's get straight into it.
So, this profession emerged really out of my own personal experience. And so, trauma is a pretty extensive word in terms of the scope of what it references. And so the understanding of what trauma is, it's not necessarily a singular event like, being caught up in a tsunami or something that is a big, what we call a big T, right?
Yeah.
Where it's very obviously traumatic. But it can also be the absence of something. So it can be the absence of a parent who can really pay attention to your emotional needs. It can be the absence of safety in your childhood home, for example, or even in your school. So, if we're experiencing bullying. And so my personal experience was coming from an environment where some of those things were happening. And I kind of set off on a quest nearly 30 years ago. And throughout the course of my life's journey, made my way to California, where I discovered more cutting-edge approaches to working with trauma. So instead of our traditional approach, which is talk therapy, where we're just sharing what we're feeling or talking about the events, it's working with the body up. So we're looking at the impact of trauma on our nervous system and our ability to relate to others and our ability to speak up for ourselves and to have self-advocacy and self-agency. And so through that journey and the acquisition of many, many, many different trainings and skill sets, modalities, it really kind of over the course of the last 20 plus years became the speciality to work with individuals, particularly helping people recover from early childhood trauma, because it's complex. So it takes a lot more consistent work and very specific skill set to work with that.
Fascinating. They say, is it the first 7 years of a child's life is when you kind of your belief systems and your opinions or your view of the world is created. It's so important in the first.
Yeah.
So if you're traumatized or something's gone on, then you sort of like you carry it through life, or I don't know if you repeat a pattern or you attract the same pattern because it's actually in your mind that's how reality is for that individual.
Yeah, and it's not, it's in, different parts of the brain get wired differently as a consequence of that, but also our nervous system. So our nervous system, instead of being fluid, where we can respond to threats in our environment naturally and go from, friendly and free like we are now into fight flight, where we would have a very immediate response to want to attack something or run away from it, we go into freeze and shut down and dissociation. And what happens is when that's happening over and over and over again, it's like the body's ability to change gears and move through those different states gets stuck. So we get stuck in fight flight, or we get stuck in shut down and freeze. And then that also impacts the brain. So it's the kind of combination between what we call neurophysiology, and being able to work, therefore, with body and brain to move someone out of those responses so that you can be free, as you said. Yeah.
And when you do this kind of work, and I'm a bit more, I don't know if you say right brain, I'm a bit more fluffy and floaty. So if it feels good and it makes a change, great.
Yeah.
But I guess at a neurological point of view, if somebody's stuck in stress or trauma or fear, whatever it is, abuse, and it's going around in their brain, neurologically, that's creating a pathway in the brain.
Yeah.
So when you do the work that you're doing, you are starting to change neurological pathways to create, like, whatever, love, acceptance, happiness, freedom. You're literally changing the brain, right?
It's part of that. So partly it's working with the neuroplasticity in the mind, which we now understand is possible, right? It's not like that's it. You've had bad experiences and that's your lot in life. And, this has really only been around for like the last 30, 40 years, our understanding of this. And it's why talk therapy is pretty ineffective for working with complex trauma, because just talking about the events doesn't work to introduce what we call corrective experiences, where you start to change the neurological responses, but also the body. So, the tendency to go into what we call emotional flashbacks, for example. So you can be triggered by something or someone, and we drop into...
You pointed at me there. Am I triggering you?
No, not at all.
We've only just started. I've still got my clothes on. It's like, we're okay.
So the trigger can produce this emotional flashback where we drop into a very, very young part of ourselves. So I may be triggered by you. I might be triggered by the color of your eyes or your voice or the clothes that you're wearing. And that can drop me into a flashback from when I was maybe 5 years old or something. And all those emotions from when we felt overwhelmed as a child come back to us. So this is what I mean by this physiological element. It's the body is taken over. We're literally hijacked from present moment by our past experiences, and then the underlying pain that has still not been resolved is also there. So it's working mind, body, and emotion, and you really have to work with all three of those simultaneously to really change the response, so that those triggers, they may still be there, but our response is different. We're not completely activated by them and taken out of our adult self into our wounded child. We can actually continue to kind of relate as adults instead of, dropping into lesser responses that we may not be so proud of.
I think if you don't have this awareness, I speak to a lot of people, and they're getting triggered in a relationship, or by the media, and or whatever it is, like experiences. It's like really the outside world for me is always a catalyst for what's going on inside you, what's already been wired inside you. So, for example, in a relationship, you might be getting triggered by this person, but really, that's not really the problem. It's like a catalyst for maybe the wiring or the belief that you've got from many years ago. I heard once that there's no big trauma and no small trauma. And I love what you said, whether you're in a tsunami or an accident, or whether your dad just didn't give you a cuddle, or your mum told you something about your looks at a certain age. The trauma is more created through like your perception, I guess, at that person's individual experience in that moment. Is that right? Because like, I've worked with heroin addicts, like young girls that have really been abused, and it's so sad. And then I've worked with other people that haven't had such a big traumatic thing, but they are still heroin addicts. And they just like, something small happened to them, or I would say small, but to that actual person, a trauma is a trauma, right? There's no kind of gauge on it.
Yeah, and for me, I tend not to use that big T, little t distinction, because many people are already minimizing their traumas, right? The absence of a consistent, loving parenting is something people often dismiss. They're like, well, I didn't have it that bad. I wasn't abused. Maybe, your parents were very wealthy and they sent you to a really good school, but you were sent away from your parents. And so you didn't have that consistent relationship in place with your parents to go to. So you become perhaps very self-reliant, unemotional as a consequence of that. And many people would say, well, they're not traumatized. They went to an amazing school. They got a great education.
A great life,
yeah, but it's what's happening for us individually. And so actually helping people to understand that whatever the trauma was, it's not irrelevant, but it's what we're looking for is what's the outcome in you? How are you able to relate to yourself and also to others? And if it's challenging, if you're struggling, to be your authentic self, if you're conflict avoidant, if you're a people pleaser, if you're someone who seeks power over others, all of these sort of personality dynamics that come out of those experiences, then the trauma is still running your show and it's not you. And so the work then is to alleviate the suffering that underlies that, so that you can really embody your real self, essentially.
To really find that magic inside.
Yeah.
What about this kind of, I don't even like using the word, but I'm going to use it because I'm so passionate about helping people wake up as well, or heal, whatever. The victim consciousness, because sometimes people can get caught up in a story so much that the story then becomes not the trauma, and I'm not taking it away from them, obviously, but when you get so lost in the story and you're going around in the same story for years and years and years, in a way, it's disempowering that person to be free. Do you ever experience people that have this victim consciousness? Is that like, is there a difference between that and somebody actually really wants to get into the trauma and get out of it? Does that make sense?
There's a number of layers to it.
Yes, I love layers.
So there is our physiological response to something where we have gone into a somatic shutdown, which somatic means of the body. Yeah. So, for example, we collapse. It's like our boundaries shut down, and we feel very small, and we feel like the other person has power over us. But it's very physiological. It's coming from the reptilian part of our brain, and we actually have no control over that. So it's sometimes a genuine response and we can get stuck in that response. So we may actually be the victim to a particular dynamic. So it's not so much consciousness because it's coming from what's happened in our own body. Then there's another layer, which is where, if you're familiar with the drama triangle, we often go into victim within a certain relational dynamic because the other person has put themselves into position of perpetrator over us. That one's a little bit easier because it's not necessarily coming from what's happening in our body. It's coming because the other person is perhaps, bullying us or shouting at us. And we have capacity then to say, hey, you don't get to talk to me like that, or to, seek a different outcome. And then I think what you're referring to more is when someone has a history of those two things, and then they tend to get caught in what we call reenactment, where it's like they just keep engaging in similar dynamics and drawing in, more traumatic experiences or bringing in toxic people and finding that they just can't get out. And that is primarily often because you have this underlying response in their body where they've moved into a place of shutdown and dissociation. So working with somatic practices and working with inner child reparenting practices are ways that we can grow someone out of that victim consciousness. Yeah.
I was just in the UK a couple of weeks back, and I was running a retreat, and obviously I love talking. So I do all the talking, teaching all the meditations, and then we was doing ice baths and breathwork. Yeah. And we did a breathwork session. And so I'm not really doing a lot of talking in that. So my ego kind of like took a bit of a slap. So I didn't get all the credit for this one. But the lady, basically, she was laying there through this breathwork session that I'd guided. Oh my God, I don't think I've ever seen anybody shake so much. Like she uncontrollably shaking. And I've got all the skills and the tools kind of like to be comfortable in that situation. So I wouldn't advise anybody to put people in a trauma if you don't feel comfortable with it. So I felt very comfortable being in this session with her, and I let her go through this process. Why was she shaking so much? And then when she came out, it was like, seriously, you could see it a mile away. She was physically shaking, but she said, I don't even know what's going on.
I can explain.
Go. This is what I want, and I can tell her.
So in all mammals have this response. It is our body's natural response to move from shutdown, freeze, through fight, flight, back into what we call friendly and free, or social engagement.
The polar bear on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. The polar bear on YouTube, you know it. Yeah. And so in the animal kingdom, when there's a predator, the victim, the prey, will sometimes go into what is called thanatosis, which is a pretend death. Thanatosis. In order to survive the predator. So predators are not interested in already dead animals, right?
Wow.
Because maybe they got poisoned or they have a sickness. And so the animal will play dead, and the predator will often come over and sort of have a sniff around, poke at it, realize it's already dead, and walk away. So it's a survival strategy. And the body's natural way to come out of that is to tremor, is to shake. And so we all have that innately within us. And I don't know if you remember, but as a kid, if there was a big shock happened, you're sort of sitting there like a leaf tremoring away. And we tend to, as we get older, shut this down in ourselves. Partially because shaking is seen as a weakness, and we have this social construct, right, where we don't want to be perceived as weak. Or it's a sign of illness. And because we have this wonderful neocortex that interprets things and makes up stories, it's like, oh, I don't want to shake because that friend over there might see me as weaker than them. So we tend to start suppressing it and overriding it in ourselves. And there's an amazing trauma specialist called Dr. David Bocelli, who worked a lot in war-torn countries, and he would go into the bomb shelters and witness this, where the adults would be all stoic and sitting there, strong, and the kids, after the threat had passed and the bombing, the planes had gone, the kids would be tremoring away. And he was like, wow, what's happening here? Why are the kids doing this and the adults are not doing this anymore? And so he found a way to actually help switch this mechanism back on in the body. And this is the foundation of what we call TRE, trauma release exercises.
Switch it on for the adults, you mean?
Yeah,
See, and this is
exactly.
What you take people through.
Yeah. And what it's doing is it's bringing you, so that those different states of the nervous system I'm mentioning, so freeze, fight, flight, back into friendly and free. The tremoring is the body's way of actually completely coming out and shaking its way back into where you will get to experience peace and connection and joy and love and patience and compassion, all the utopian things that we want to be experiencing. And when we're in fight flight, we're not experiencing that. We're experiencing anxiety and stress and worry and anger and rage. And then when we're in the freeze state, we're experiencing depression and dissociation and numbness and hopelessness. So the tremoring mechanism is a really essential part of us as human beings. And it's so fascinating to me. It's like, wow, this is essential for us to be healthy, to actually stay in optimal wellness and optimal relationships. And yet most of us have lost access to it. So it's beautiful when you're actually supporting someone through that. And you can do it naturally through some specific placements of the legs and essentially beginning to initiate that tremor response. It starts usually in the psoas muscle.
Just going to ask, what do we do to start releasing?
Well, you can find a TRE practitioner who can guide you through it. A lot of people experience this too in plant medicine ceremonies, because the body is the plant medicine goes into the cells and helps to kind of break up the pattern of being stuck in those other states and tremoring for hours at a time.
Osho did the whole dance, the shaking.
But it's not the same.
Why is it not the same?
Because you're making it happen.
The dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is a neurogenic tremor, it's called, and it's coming from your body. And one of the reasons why it's actually super potent when it happens is because if you've experienced a lot of physical trauma, for example, or medical trauma, where your body has shut down and gone into freeze as a result of invasion, right? Let's say if you've been in surgery or you've had lots of accidents, or you've experienced, physical punishment or sexual abuse. Those traumas are something being done to your body.
Yeah.
And so it's still very unsafe for someone to do something to your body. But because this happens inside your body, of your body's own accord, it's your body literally moving back into homeostasis. And so the fact that your body is doing it for itself at its own pace is an enormous part of also the recovery of your body, because it's not someone doing something to you. So just holding space for it, as it sounds like you did, and being witness to it and letting that person's body come out in its own time is where the healing occurs.
Yeah, it's funny. Years ago, I did a tantra. Brilliant. I love this. Thank you so much. Yeah, I did it. I remember.
Now you can explain.
Yeah. No, but years
happened.
ago, I did a tantra workshop, and I remember it's a completely different topic, but I'll get to the point. And there was a girl sitting next to me, and we was in the sharing circle, and she started crying. And being me, like very British and a bit of a people pleaser, I kind of sat next to her and gave her a tissue and kind of like tried to put my arm around her to console her, right? I never want to see anybody upset. And then another lady on the other side literally did the same thing. So this woman was like sandwiched in between two of these people pleasers, right? But the tantra teacher told us both off. Not in a horrible way. She's like, no. She said, stop. She said maybe she needs to go through this trauma, this process, without people kind of always sort of like being there for you. And at that time, there was a part of me that was triggered by the teacher, because I was like, no, if someone's crying, I'm going to cuddle them. Do you know what I mean? Or give them a tissue, because I'm just trying to be polite. But if I'm very honest, I kind of walked away and checked in with my own ego. I was like, she was so right. And that's what happened with this lady that was at my retreat a couple of weeks ago. She was shaking and she was having this release. And I saw one of the other students, bless him, like me, like he really didn't want to see this person suffering. He put his arm out because he was laying next to her on another yoga mat. And like she kind of moved his arm away. Mm-hmm. And I held the space, I was walking around and I didn't go over to her. And I just let her shake and I let her shake. And it was all thanks to that tantra teacher. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I don't know if there is a right or wrong, but I'm just curious to know, why would we do that? We just let people go through that process and naturally have that trauma release, or should I have given her the tissues?
I can explain.
Yes.
So there's a few things at play here. First of all, if someone has a lot of attachment trauma, so let's say as a child you've been left to cry out by yourself and no one has come to you consistently, then actually when we experience someone coming in to offer us help and connection, it can be really overwhelming to parts of us. So the actual presence of someone can, if we're going through a kind of repair process, right, where we've dropped into a traumatic memory or we're in an emotional flashback and we're not used to having people there, then someone coming in like that to bring touch particularly can overwhelm our system completely, and we can get pushed more into dissociation rather than what you're seeking. You're seeking to go in and give her a hand and kind of help pull her out of the place that she's in. But actually the presence could be too much. So I run these trauma awareness trainings, and one of the things we teach in those is understanding how we need to be attuned to our students or our clients in the various experiences we're offering, and to recognize this. And so we can still support someone, but in a different way. So we might come and sit next to them and actually ground ourselves and focus on our own breathing and regulate our nervous system. So just the presence of us helps to regulate the nervous system of the other person, but offering touch or even offering eye connection can be too much. So we can be there and we can just sit and be present. And then someone knows that there's a witness. There's someone actually just there if they need it. But to really heal, to really bring resolution to those traumatized parts, perhaps from early attachment trauma, it needs to be on their terms. So if I'm doing that deep work with someone, for example, I will put my hand there and say, my hand is here whenever you wish to take it.
Oh, I like that.
So it's completely different, right? It's like, wow, there's
Like I wanna take
connection. There's connection, but it's not coming at me, which can be overwhelming. It's like, wow, there's a hand there. Can I reach out for it? And often what will come up is the fear that it's actually going to be taken away. Because when there's been inconsistent parenting, for example, then it's like, is it going to stay there or is it not going to stay there? And actually when it's there and someone gets to kind of come and connect in their own way, it's so much more supportive to that person's internal responses that they're going through. And so it's not entirely that we want to just let them go through it and be like, oh yeah, they're over there and I'm going off to get a cup of coffee, right? It's that we want to understand the deeper layers of how we can truly hold space for all those parts that exist in so many people that we may not be aware of.
Yeah, if that Tantra teacher is watching, I'm so glad that she told me off that time, because this is 10 years later.
Yeah.
And then I see this lady shaking. I'm like, I just felt like she had to go through it. And her feedback after was like, I'm glad you didn't come over and get me out of that.
Exactly.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Because the other Brett that didn't get told off,
Yeah.
he would have been straight there, give her a tissue.
And sometimes this can be our stuff because we're in a rescuer
Yeah.
dynamic where, we're sometimes uncomfortable with the feelings of others, right?
Yeah.
And we feel like we have to make it better.
Yeah.
And we want to step in and take their pain away. And it's not that that's not what's going to happen. It's just by being present and being in more of an observer mode, we can really see more deeply what that person's true need is. And actually to meet with their own pain for the first time might be part of what's happening. But we don't want to abandon them. We want to give a little bit of space, essentially.
Like you said, let them know that the hand is there if they
Yeah.
want to take it. I used to be a therapist with another hat on years ago, doing EFT and matrix re-imprinting. We talk a lot about traumas and echoes, these energy consciousness holograms, and it's a beautiful theory. Sometimes I'm just not into the theory, I'm just more into the results and seeing people's changes. I find that fascinating. You can literally watch a trauma release in someone's facial expressions when something happens, And one of the things which I want to find out what you say about is, do you feel like, I feel like the brain is so intelligent, or the essence or the emotions, there's something in us which is so intelligent that it will let you release a trauma when you're ready for it. It kind of keeps us in pain or suffering. Like, for example, a heroin addict isn't stupid. They know that sticking a needle inside their groin or their arm is pretty bad news, right?
Yeah.
I'm using an extreme case right here. But they're doing it because they're soothing up some trauma or some pain, only from the experience that I've had when I've worked with them. And so on the outside, we can go, stop taking drugs, it's bad for you. But on the inside, they can't deal with that trauma just yet. Maybe they haven't got the skills, or the right teacher or the right hand to hold, etc., etc. So in a weird way, I kind of see sometimes like this pain that we go through, whether it's an addiction or whether it's reliving it, it's like it is kind of protecting us just as much. Like, I'd like to hear what you say, because again, if that person was really ready to get out of it and be free from it, then they would be already, right? Guys, I know you're enjoying the video, but I've got a quick question for you. Are you okay with that monkey mind being a monkey? We've all got this voice inside the head, or voices filled with self-doubt, criticism, judgment. But most people don't understand how important it is to master that monkey mind. So look, if you've got a monkey mind or a voice that is just busy inside your head and it never seems to shut up, I know exactly how you feel. And thankfully, I found meditation about 20 years ago. And so, I have an amazing opportunity for you. It's the Bodhi Meditation Teacher Training Program. This 10-week program is designed to share with you 8 Bodhi meditations. And the amazing thing about these meditations is that they are scientifically proven to help you reduce stress, reduce anxiety, uplift your mood, boost your energy. In other words, create that kind of lifestyle, that energy and that health and that happiness that most people crave. Over the course of 10 weeks, I'm going to be your meditation coach. And at the end of this course, you're going to become a certified Bodhi meditation teacher. That means that you can coach people one-to-one, you can work from anywhere in the world, build online courses, or even teach meditation at yoga retreats or anywhere you decide. So click that link below and together will open up your heart so that you wake up feeling positive and literally this buzz for life. The link is below. Now you can get back to your video. Have an amazing day.
Yeah, I mean, it's very frustrating for family members and friends and loved ones of people who are in trauma responses and engaging in, substance use, misuse, or in their addictions. And the reason we engage in using substances or sex or gambling or overworking is actually
eating, right? Food.
Also definitely eating, comfort eating, is because we're trying to manage what's happening in our physiology. So if we're caught in fight flight, we have a tendency that the sensations are very uncomfortable. Anxiety, which is part of fight flight, is all up here, right? It's like this intense kind of sensation happening here. So we're trying to suppress the sensation because it's so uncomfortable to live in our own bodies when we feel that. So we're looking for substances, alcohol, weed, comfort eating, things that will numb this overwhelm sensation inside our bodies. If we're in numbness and dissociation and freeze, we don't feel. It's actually that we've got shut down to our sensations. So then we tend to seek out experiences that are extreme. Or things that are going to suddenly make us feel alive because we actually feel half dead inside. And so the root of most of those behaviors is coming from our physiology. And absolutely, we would, if we could just switch it off, we would. If we could just escape ourselves, which is essentially what we're trying to do, we would. And so with all the best will in the world, telling someone to stop doing something, it's not going to happen. But when we help actually transition the body fully through the trauma response, and work with somatic practices, you come out of that being stuck in the wrong gear and return into peace and presence, and then actually teaching people how to manage what we call dysregulation or emotional dysregulation, which is when we go into fight flight. Instead of going, I'm in fight flight, I need a cigarette and I need a glass of wine. Alternatively, we're learning wellness practices. We're learning how to speak to the inner child parts of us that may have got overwhelmed. We're learning how to use breath practices or somatic practices so that we don't get such intense sensations that then lead to the addiction. So there's absolutely a way out, but not in the way that most people try to do it, right? It's like, well, just give up the substance. And actually, when we try to give up the coping mechanism that we maybe developed when we were like 5 years old or 10 years old, if you've ever tried to take a bone off a dog, doesn't really go very well, but it's the same thing, right? You're trying to wrestle the bone away from the dog, and usually the dog just grips on more and starts to get really angry with you. And I see that very frequently with people who have addictions. The more you try to take it away, the parts that learnt that as a very young age as coping mechanism are freaking out because it's about survival. And so actually what we do is we start to bring in alternative practices so that there's evidence of being able to experience what it's like when you have a new coping mechanism that is healthy, that supports your physiology. And then we can actually even celebrate the part that took on that coping mechanism.
Yeah, thank
like
it, 'cause it did you a
celebrate the
favour,
5-year-old kid that learned to
Yeah.
use sugar
Yeah.
to cope with the dysregulation because you were in a home with a very angry parent, for example. And then when we celebrate that part and we bring it in as an ally to say, okay, now let's find a new way of doing this. And then the part becomes really excited because it's
Yeah.
like, wait, I did really good at this, so now
Yeah.
I could do really good at the next thing.
Because again, it's
So
like
it's a very different approach.
I think the body and the brain are such beautiful gifts. They're keeping you alive naturally. It's an intelligence that wants us to live. So I think traumas and these kind of, which are not nice, but in the way that we cope, it's actually doing us a favour. Whenever I worked with the addicts, the homeless people, I'd never really talk about drink or drugs. Like, Brett, you're the only person that doesn't talk about my addiction. I'm like, because your addiction isn't the problem.
Exactly.
Like your drug and the heroin isn't the problem. It's because you was abused or you
Yeah.
wasn't loved or you don't love yourself from when you was a child. So let's always get to the root cause of it, heal that. And I guarantee when you're truly in that vibration, that love, you're not going to put all the shit inside your body because you love yourself, right?
Yeah, and also you've shifted the physiology, so you're no longer in that place where it's so uncomfortable that you're looking for something to take away the discomfort inside.
So we're talking about some extreme, well, I'm talking about some extreme cases like heroin addicts, but the average person that might be at home, I say average, we're all beautiful, sorry, judgmental. You're not living in Copenhagen, you're average. No, I'm joking. For people that are at home, that might be watching this podcast, this YouTube channel, watching Netflix every week, binging on certain foods. It's kind of normal. Like taking heroin and smelling and living on the street, it's just like then you're kind of a little bit outcasted from society and it's not normal. But like you say, gambling, shopping, doing all the things that society or eating so much sugar that has created like this is just normal. But really we're still suffering because we're still avoiding that kind of quote unquote trauma or pain or hole in the soul. Not sure where I was going with this, but how would you sort of relate to those people that haven't had these crazy experiences, but let's just say they're just unhappy.
Yeah.
And they might never think, oh, I've got a trauma, but they're just going through the motions in life. They're feeling a little bit stuck. Like, there must be some traumas in them because otherwise they wouldn't be wanting to escape reality by just zoning out on binging Netflix or overeating every night and then feeling guilty that they've been overeating. It's like we drive ourselves insane. I know we all do it somewhere. So then how would you, and again, they're not kind of like, oh, I need to see a trauma specialist and I've got this big thing that happened to me when I was 5. Like, no, I had a great life. What would you say to those kind of people?
Well, we live in we're living in a collective experience that is also traumatic, known as capitalism.
We're going there.
And so the mechanistic approach that we've come into really since the Industrial Revolution, right? When we were more agricultural based as our communities, we were connected to nature. We were living in tune with the cycles and the seasons, the cycles of the day, but the seasons as well. We didn't have mass use of electricity. We didn't have Wi-Fi and Netflix and Facebook and all of these things. And we lived on a much more natural diet, right? But more importantly, we weren't trying to work 12, 15 hours a day. We were, short bursts of work and then rest, often in the afternoons. And so as we've moved more into a city-based lifestyle and we've moved more into the, outcome of the Industrial Revolution, which is, long working hours, very limited breaks, using artificial light to push ourselves beyond our limits, there's a collective trauma response that we're in as a result of the economic structure. And so many people, even without the direct trauma in the way that we're discussing, are still subject to that. And, it's why we have such high rates of depression and anxiety. Depression being a physiological response of the body going into shutdown, anxiety being fight flight. And our whole system is designed to keep us in fight flight. So it's super important to bring in practices that allow your system to come into reset, that allow your system to go from this fight-flight response into what we call parasympathetic, which is where we experience cell growth and repair. It's where we experience longevity and anti-aging. It's where we get the best digestive response in our body, which means we're absorbing the nutrients, we're getting good rest. And, if you take the average city, London or New York, most people are running around high on coffee for half the day and then using substances in the evening to come down, basically, yeah. And so, I know from my own personal experience, I was around 22 when I first took a yoga class. And I walked out of this yoga class. It was in Shivananda in Putney in London.
Brilliant.
And I walked out of this class like, what is this feeling? It was so obscure to me. And it was I was out of anxiety for the first time in my life. And I had no idea that I lived in anxiety. And I was like, what is this feeling? I want more of this, right? And that, I mean, it was such a gift that I got to experience that then, because I've been practicing for 26 years and really just started to understand and walk this path of recognizing the need to restore ourselves, to bring us into a place of reset. And unfortunately, what is normalized in our culture, or has been normalized, is substance use and abuse, television, sugar, all the things you're mentioning, right? And so the way I see it is that, when yoga kind of came to the West, was the beginning of rebalancing society out of this trauma response to all in from capitalism. We're still a long way off actually having that happen. But, most of us live in really stressed out environments in the city, cost of living going up, inflation, trying to pay the mortgage. We're very lucky being here in Thailand, where it's a much more sympathetic environment, right? Parasympathetic environment, sorry. We're, in nature all the time. There are waterfalls and ice baths and yoga, and that is our normal. But for people back home living in England or anywhere else in the world where you're stuck in that kind of stressed out city life, actually consciously doing things, practicing yoga, practicing meditation, doing breath work, going and doing ice baths and steams, going to retreats and really understanding actually how to increase your vagal tone.
Vagal tone.
So everything that we're talking about here, what is going on in our bodies, is in direct relation to what's happening with our vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And so when we have chronic stress over a long period of time, or we have trauma, our vagal tone gets dialed down, which leads to sickness, ill health, greater stress responses. And when we do things like yoga and eat a healthy diet, and we detox, and we do breathwork practices, and we dance, and we spend time in nature, we increase our vagal tone. And there's tons and tons of evidence-based, peer-reviewed research which now really documents this, that actually our optimal wellness, our optimal relating comes from high vagal tone. So it's something to know about and something to explore for sure if you want to live a well and happy, rewarding life.
It's fascinating, right? Like yoga's been going for thousands of years, and we've only, not I say recently, but in the last sort of like 100 years or whatever, 50 years, it's been over to the West, and like it's crazy when you think about it. It's mad.
Yeah.
So when we talk about things, I know I need to not forgive myself, but I need to be mindful, because I'm like, well, this is common sense, but it's not common practice, and it isn't common sense for people that are lost in it. And when I say common sense, it's like, well, it's just obvious. Eat the right food, go to bed early, move your body, whether you do yoga or go to the gym or running up and down a hill. But that's not really common sense for everybody nowadays, is it? It's like it is. What's more obvious is that you get up, you have a coffee just to get through the day, you get to work, you come home, you keep yourself up late, and that, to me, you're so out of alignment, or you're so out of balance with just this intelligence, this overflow of pure positive energy. It's just buzzing. So my question is then, if it's not common sense for people, what could we do, or what could people do on a day-to-day basis to get this practice going? I'm watching TV, I'm drinking a bottle of wine, but I know I'm stuck. I know I'm bored, or I know I don't want to spend another 10 years of my life like this. What would you say to people would be like the top 3 practices that they could go off, literally start doing now, where they don't, without trying to put you out of business, but they don't have to go and see a therapist just yet,
totally.
But they could literally start retuning this vagal nerve, or maybe just surrendering into the stuff. What would you say are the top 3? So
3 of the most really effective practices. One is breath work, because most of the time when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, we have chronic muscular tension in the body, and particularly in the solar plexus, the belly, and the upper chest.
Why is it more there?
Because when we go into fight, flight, when the heart rate gets elevated, our breath shortens, so we get short, sharp breath rather than deep, full belly breaths. And when we go into shutdown, we tend to physically collapse. So you get this sort of compression in the upper part of the lungs. So if you're doing pranayama, breath work, that is fire breath, for example, is fantastic for Kalabati is fantastic for enlivening the system. So if you're feeling collapsed and heavy and depressed, then you want to do something like that.
This is a short shot,
Yeah.
a real fast one.
Exactly, yeah.
Who knows, yeah.
And then if you're anxious, if you're stressed a lot and you're really bitey and, responding in a reactive way to things, you want to work with a really soothing breath that calms the system down and helps bring the breath from being short and sharp and stuck up here all the way down into the belly, so you induce relaxation into the system. But for most people that I work with, the stress has been established really early on, like, between 0 and like 5 years old. And so those patterns are really deep.
And if your identity.
Yeah, it does. And you don't know any different. That's the other point. Like, if you've grown up in a stressful home, your body doesn't have a different set point. You've got no reference point of how good you could feel, right? And so one of the most potent ways to really shock your nervous system and your vagus back into a healthy response where it can move through the different states is ice baths and heat. So it's the heat cold plunge dynamic, because essentially it puts your body into a near-death response, which sounds awful, but it's really not, because the body has to reset. And it's one of the reasons why I see this has become so popular, but it's not something you should be doing every day. We're talking, once every couple of weeks, essentially, even if your system...
Ice bath, you mean?
Yeah. At least if you have had a chronic history of being in a trauma response, a threat response.
Yeah, I started doing the ice bath. I started doing cold showers years ago.
Same
It was a
thing.
game changer.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, even certain cravings that I was getting or moods, they just started changing. Just because I was just getting in the cold shower for a couple of minutes a day. For me, it was phenomenal. And I was like, wow, imagine you could have gone back 10 years ago when you was really in a lot of addictions. I think that would have reduced or got out of it quicker, or like you say, trauma, because you're kind of in the moment straight away.
Yeah. And then
That's the two. So the first one was breathwork, ice bath.
Yeah. And then the third one is more learning to regulate your own responses. So
does that mean?
Learning somatic practices, because the first two will help your nervous system to be reset. But if you're getting triggered all the time because of relational injury in your early experiences, then you're still going to be triggered all the time. Your body's still going to be in an inflammation response. You're still going to drop into emotional flashbacks. And so learning how to identify that you are triggered, first and foremost. We often, let's just say, we're peaceful here right now and somebody walks in screaming and shouting, we're probably both going to get triggered very, very quickly in response to that. And what's important is being able to recognize the sensations in your body that let you know you're going in the direction of being triggered, because that gives you information to then be able to do a somatic practice to calm your system down, so you're not going fully into the emotional flood or flashback, which can then snowball, and then suddenly you're depressed for 4 days, or you're using substances to cope with the dysregulation that's happened inside yourself. So I always encourage people to seek to learn somatic practices, because they are so immediate in actually bringing you out of those stress responses. But very few people are actually aware of what those practices are. I think you and I both grew up at a similar time in England. And what is really beautiful is now, for the next generation, we have what's called trauma-informed schooling coming into play. It started predominantly in California, but it's really taking root in England now. So kids who are acting out and misbehaving in school, instead of being punished and being put on detention, it's now that they're being educated, and teachers are being educated in recognizing these kids don't have emotional regulation because they're growing up around parents that don't have the skills to teach emotional regulation to their own kids. And so it's not their fault, right? Yeah. And many of us as adults got left without the skill set.
I was left outside the detention office.
Yeah, me too. So it's actually bringing in a whole new level of understanding about how to relate to yourself in ways that you're really managing your emotional responses to life. And then you can be we call it the window of tolerance. You can live within the window of tolerance and be responsive to things rather than reactive.
I love that. Yeah, it's so good. And two things, like The first thing is I love that you called it sensation in the body. This is something that I share when I teach meditation with students. It's like, rather than call it my anxiety or my depression, not trying to avoid it or completely detach, because there's definitely something going on.
Yeah.
There's a sensation, but try to go beyond these labels and actually welcome it in for a cup of tea. Take a breath, like take a breath.
Cute.
Or take a breath with it, and because we either try to avoid it or we hate feeling like it, or then we identify with it. And from my experience, or the experience that I seem to be going through, is that when you do that and you identify it, either stays longer or that becomes your identity and that's how you show up. And so if we want to be free, again, that's not to avoid it and say it's not there.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
all for rolling up your sleeves and bringing it in. Actually, I think that's so needed.
Well, anxiety is just a label that we've collectively agreed upon to mean I'm in a fight-flight response,
There's something going
and there's
on.
a lot of sensations going on in my chest.
Yeah.
And so somatics is really the soma, it's the study of what's happening in the body. And so when we become curious, and this is the key ingredient, if we remain curious about our sensations, we get to go into a completely different relationship with ourselves. And, if I'm working with a client, the classic response, initially someone will say, well, I have anxiety. Okay, great. What's the sensation beneath that? And 9 times out of 10, someone will say jangling or jittery sensation. And where is that in your body? It's right here. It's in the chest. So, if we were really engaging with each other deeply, and I said to you, how are you doing today, Brett? And you were like, I'm feeling jittery and jangly in my chest, right? That would be the correct answer, as opposed to I'm feeling anxious. And from that place, then it would be, okay, well, let me help you soothe your nervous system so you can shift out of that anxiety really in a heartbeat. So I have a lot of hope for humanity because this stuff is also relatively new. It's really only been uncovered in the way of understanding in the last 30 years or so. And it takes time for it to spill out from, the halls of academia into mass consciousness. So, but we're on that way.
We're on the path.
Yeah, we are.
Which is going to bring me to my next question, but now you've brought me another point. Because I don't think animals go you don't see, the dog walk over to the other dog and go, oh, mate, I've got anxiety today.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I've been chasing another dog and he's a lot bigger than me, or I've got to pay my bills. It seems like humans have labelled so much that we, like you say, it's a sensation. There's something there. You can either breathe through it or you can hold a friend's hand. There's many different ways. But there's some part of us, whether you call it an ego or a self-image, whatever it is, that then identifies with it so much. Like with that polar bear, if you've not seen it, maybe we can put a link somewhere. The polar bear's running in the snow, I think it is, and they're trying to do. Are they trying to help him in some way? So they have to tranquilize him.
Yeah, they're tracking the polar bears.
Tracking the polar bear.
And for environmental research.
So they shoot it in from the helicopter, and when it stops, it's still running. It's still sort of shaking. But I don't think he kept on to that. Like he probably didn't speak about that for another 6 years. Do you know what I mean? That time when I was in a helicopter, it's done.
Yeah.
Because he naturally, what I'm trying to get to is, animals seem to be still more in tune with naturally what you're meant to be doing. And as humans, we've become so sophisticated and advanced, which I love, it's beautiful, but also we're still very kind of limited or we haven't kind of matured in that area of actually just shake it out, just release it, it's natural. We've now got a story about it, that story creates my life about it, and then that just creates a lot of suffering.
And then we get stuck.
Hello, you amazing viewer. I hope you're enjoying this video, and I've got some really exciting news for you. You know that moment when you're reading a book and it just ignites that light bulb moment for you? It wakes something up inside you, that passion, that enthusiasm, or that spark for life. Well, the big announcement is my new book, Awaken Your Spirit, is ready for either pre-order or, depending on when you're watching this book, you can order your copy right now. Over the last couple of years, I've poured my heart and soul into writing Awaken Your Spirit. I don't know about you, but sometimes that voice inside the head just never seems to shut up. Well, this book shows you a step-by-step process on how to really close your eyes and go inside and separate from this monkey mind and this never-ending conversation that goes round and round and round. Whether you're seeking inner peace, you're looking to recharge your batteries, or you want to feel more grounded and in harmony with life, this book has got something for you, and it's going to show you how to connect to a very deeper level within you. Now, I don't want to keep any more of your time. Get back to the interview. And again, if you're somebody that really is looking to get back in the driving seat of your life, Master this monkey mind, reach your full potential and ignite that excitement, that enthusiasm and that passion for life. Make sure you awaken your spirit just below. Have an amazing day and enjoy the rest of the video. Then we get really stuck.
Well, it's the neocortex, this beautiful front part of the brain that we've developed more recently. And, that's what gives us language, that's what gives us story, that's what gives us the ability to articulate what happened. And obviously there's so much that comes from that, books and sharing and art. But many of us have also got stuck where there's this split from the mind body. And for me, that's really where we're at in terms of the evolution of humanity. We will, our split from Mother Earth as well comes because we've got stuck in the neocortex. We are disembodied. And the more that we actually heal the relationship between mind, body, the more that we engage in these practices and come back into unison with our own senses, that includes our relationship to the earth, then we will evolve as a humanity. And at the moment, we're a little bit stuck, it seems. So there's a mass process of integration happening here.
That whole sentence or paragraph there should be in the front of your book. That was insane. You're so right. And I love, if we're not so stuck in individual level, we can see that we're stuck in the head. But then on a collective level, we can see that how we're destroying the planet and nature and the other animals because we're stuck in the greed and the head sort of stuff. So my other question, which I really want to bring it back to because I'm really passionate about little people, kids.
Okay.
Because we're doing all of this work now to heal people that were unfortunately traumatized, et cetera, et cetera. If there's parents watching or somebody's thinking about having a child, what can we do to be better parents? And again, we're not judging any parents that have had a child that's traumatized or they've been through trauma, but if we are going to push humanity forward, if we are raising consciousness, then we need to, again, back to the root cause of it, it all starts in childhood, right?
Yeah.
Now, children don't come with a manual and there's no kind of some parents are always going to screw their kids up, bless them, and it's not the parents' fault either. But now we're having these conscious conversations. How can parents start bringing these kids up with, would they talk about their feelings, their traumas? What would you suggest? Now you've seen it from the other end and obviously you've been through your own stuff. What would you say to the kids, to the parents, I should say, or...
Well, like I said, there's this new movement of trauma-informed education emerging, which is great because sometimes the parents are the problem. And so the fact that these practices are being taught in schools potentially gives these kids this skill set to navigate life in a different way. But there's also a huge movement happening in lots of parenting circles where the emphasis is on the recognition that what is more valuable for children than perhaps content being pushed into them is learning about self-regulation and co-regulation, which means, in short, learning to work with your nervous system. And when you can't cope with your own nervous system, you go and you borrow someone else's. And so the role of a parent primarily is to lend your nervous system to the child.
Wow.
Because between 0 and 3-4 years old, we cannot self-regulate. We don't have the capacity. So as a parent, you're having to soothe the child with your own biology, essentially. And so there's a huge amount of understanding emerging around this, and lots of different tools and online classes and books. There's a beautiful book called Raising a Secure Child,
Oh, I love
which
that.
teaches parents
Raising
how
a Secure
to
Child.
support children in that way. And there's a few people I know out there who actually have come through our trainings and have become parents, and they're, using those practices in their own, but they're also now starting groups for dads or groups for other mothers. So there's a lot actually happening in the world to shift us towards this
So
co-regulated place of harmony and connection and safety in relationship, which is where we really drastically need to go as humans, I feel. So
yeah, and again, if you get it with the young people, then they might not become the addicts and have to go and see a trauma specialist.
Yeah.
Trauma
recovery
specialist. We had a guy here, Tony, he was on the podcast, one of the interviews, really lovely guy. Anyway, he came over to Thailand for a few months with his little boy Stan, and it was such an eye-opener for me. It was like I've done a lot of work on myself, I've been to loads and loads of workshops, done lots of talking, but I'm somebody that kind of gets, when I see the experience happening right in front of me, that's just as much. And what I mean by that is I just watched how Tony was parenting his son And I'm not judging my dad or my parents at all whatsoever. I think you only do what you can do with what you've got. So I'm not judging them at all. But just I noticed how sensitive his little boy was and how his dad handled that. And I know how sensitive I was, but I never knew that until now. I've become like 40, and I'm like, how that was handled, bless him. Again, no judgment whatsoever, but I can definitely see why I become a drug addict, why I indulge in absolutely everything. And everything you're saying is like spot on, and all the clients I've worked with. And so that's why I was just trying to really, like, Tony's reading all these books. They're learning about, positive discipline, all of these things, and like 10 out of 10 for being a dad and his partner Faith. They're incredible. But it was just so obvious. Again, it was common sense. Like, wow, it all starts there.
Yeah.
Like just the way they're talking to him, the way they're conditioning him in a positive way, because you're going to condition your kids one way or the other. And it was just so beautiful to see that awareness as parents.
And I think it's got to be hard. I'm not a parent, but it's got to be very hard because you're also going against the grain of what's been normalized. I've had some conversations with my dad. He grew up in an era where corporal punishment was totally normalized. Being spanked
at school
by teachers. It was even in the books. Kids' books, like the teachers with the cane and everything else. So, in 2 generations, we've already jumped from where corporal punishment was normal, if not even celebrated, and then now we're in the generation where that's considered child abuse, right? So 20, 40 years later. And now we've got this next generation coming through where, teaching kids emotional regulation, understanding sensitivity, being able to really meet the kids' emotions in the fullest way. And it's exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Exciting. Okay, so this is amazing. I could speak to you for hours, so thank you so much. You look so beautiful as well, so I really appreciate your energy and being on this podcast. It's amazing.
It's beautiful to be here.
For anyone listening, highly recommend your 3 steps. Number 1 was breathwork. Number 2 was ice bath. And number 3 was learning how to regulate the emotions or becoming aware of the sensations that are in the body.
Yeah, and learning somatic practices or working with somatic experiencing practitioners to also unburden you of the legacy of trauma that you may be carrying in your system.
Legacy of trauma.
Yeah.
I was going to end it there, but there's another point. I remember a while ago, I had lots of lust, like crazy amounts of lust and sexual energy. And I remember laying in Shavasana, which is the pose at the end of a yoga class where you're just like dribbling and you're on your back feeling all bliss. And I was like, hold up a minute. This energy isn't even mine. It's like there's pools of anger or lust or fear or anxiety where it's just in the ethos, and it's like every now and then it sucks, because I was like, wow, if I really tune into my essence, like that's so not me. But then I'd look at like patterns in my family and I'm like, wow, they followed. I'm like, where did this shit come from? And so I love that you just said generations of this, because it might not even be nothing to do with us. But it is our responsibility to look at these behaviours and these with awareness, or regulate our emotions, or do the exercises to free ourselves from that. And I think when we're free, we're just then back in bliss again, We're in that childlike state, that innocence.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other research in the field of what's called epigenetics, where we look at, the legacy of ancestral trauma and how that gets handed down through our DNA. So it may not be even our direct personal experiences that we're responding to. Sometimes it is familial patterns, and certainly for a lot of my clients where there's often a multi-generational experience of, abuse or addiction in the family system, then working with modalities such as family constellation work or ancestral healing to help kind of, the way I see it is it's like you're trying to do your own healing work, you're engaging on all the modalities, but essentially it's like you're wandering along with a fishing net attached to you with all this sort of stuff caught in it, because you are part of a family system. And so until you can bring some resolution to what's in the family system, your own healing work is going to be slower, or the work that you're doing isn't necessarily going to take up residence within you. And so one of the ways I often work is bringing people into family constellation to begin to undo that for the whole system. And as that loosens, then you can make so much more progress. So I think this is an important component. I've done a lot of work with Indigenous communities and Indigenous healers, and they laugh at us as Westerners. They're like, you can't heal alone. You're part of a family system. And so this idea that we go off as individuals and we go and do a retreat by ourselves and we're running away from our family, in the Indigenous world, that's alien. You can't heal alone. You have to work within your family system. And so recognizing we're all subject to that, right? We have ancestors, we have, family members who are carrying those traumas in their own line, and being able to work both ways, individually and with the system, is how we can really bring deep repair and recovery.
That's why going home for a week is always a good spiritual journey, because you get triggered the fuck and then you go, oh, I've got a lot of work to do.
Exactly.
But if you think about something like the law of attraction, if you just want to label it that, if you've got, a legacy of trauma, which is not ours, that's been coming from generations, and your vibration, your cells, no wonder why you will then start attracting these experiences in life, because it's just repeating and repeating, repeating.
Yeah.
So this is why I love the inner work, whatever it is that you decide to do if you're listening at home. If you keep facing outside, chasing this or avoiding and consuming all this stuff, you just know where you're going to end up. You're always going to be repeating those patterns, that cycle of suffering. But when you just stop and look inside and you start doing this inner work, when you change your vibration or your energy or your traumas, the outside has to wrap itself around your vibration. Like, that to me is just so common sense. So it really is the inner work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just personally, I see I'm a radically different person to who I was, 30 years ago. As a result of...
My Uncle Colin said, just a side note for anyone listening, this beautiful lady, actually, we never knew each other, but you knew my uncle like 20, 30 years ago.
I was 19 years old working in a pub.
Oh, and she met my Uncle Colin.
Salisbury, and he was one of the customers, which is how we initially connected.
And then we connected.
Yeah, because you were writing your book,
Yeah.
and I'd written a few books, and you reached out.
Fascinating.
For some assistance. So it was a long time ago.
It was, and I was aware that I butted in a cut across them, as usual. Gemini, thank you so much. So
Pleasure.
So first of all, what would you say to people listening? And then the second one is, where can we kind of like get some healing, or where can we find out about you? So if there's someone at home, what would you say or suggest for them to go and do? Is there a book? Is there a technique? What would you suggest?
I really encourage people to read the book Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. It's a really foundational text that will help you to really understand how unresolved trauma robs you of your present moment and your future.
Oh, I love that.
Through the lens of the neurophysiological, the neurophysiological approach that I'm referencing, and to understand why you have to bring your body into treatment, why it has to be embodied-based practices for recovery. And to look into family constellation work, somatic work, and inner child reparenting work. These are 3 really essential modalities if you want to heal your early childhood traumas, for sure. And then you can find me. GeminiAdams.com is my website. And then I also run an organization called Union.Institute, and we run programs primarily for other facilitators and teachers and practitioners who are working with the public, whether they're running classes or retreats or one-on-one sessions, to understand the depths of all of this and how we can basically create safer spaces for those individuals coming into our experiences, to look at, for example, whether or not you go and you tend to someone or you just place your hand there, but understanding everything from consent, boundaries, communication, different relational dynamics that would be at play with your students or clients if they have trauma in their history, and how we can really transform the way that we work to better meet those parts of people. So we run these trauma awareness training programs throughout the year. We have one coming up in the summer in England, the 11th to the 18th of July.
Nice.
So yeah, there's a few ways to track me down.
And can only people that are facilitators or teachers join that course, or could some, like a parent, want to come and join that course for their kids? Or is it just for training the trainers?
At the moment, this one is primarily for anyone who's in the business of helping others. Nice. But we are working on some other options for families, particularly for families, actually.
I think it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Gemini, thank you so much. So grateful. Yeah, I feel like as you're talking about it, I can feel there's something sensational. Might need to book a few sessions and do some trauma releasing.
I have the tendency to have that impact on people.
You can see me. No, thank you so much. It's
Pleasure.
Been amazing.
Thank you.
And guys, if you're listening, make sure you go and check out Gemini Adams. And the book was called
Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine.
I love that. Have an amazing day, everyone. Thank you, mate.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Hello viewers, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm hoping that you enjoyed it just as much as we enjoyed making it. We love this adventure we're on, we love growing this community, and we would love you to actually help us. So I've got a favor to ask you. Make sure that you subscribe below, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and turn that notification button on, because that actually helps us with the algorithm. In other words, it's going to help us reach more people and spread this ripple effect. And I really appreciate your time and energy for watching any video. So if you've got any comments or questions or queries, make sure you pop them in the box below. By subscribing, you are going to be one of the first people to know when we release new content. If you really want to take your journey and your growth to the next level, make sure you watch this next video and have an amazing day. Once again, thank you so much for your time and your energy. See you in the next video.